For half a century, Hollywood's most legendary friendship belonged to two men who leapt into immortality with one unforgettable scene, laughing as they plunged off a cliff in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. But behind that timeless image of courage and camaraderie lay a far deeper story. Robert Redford and Paul Newman's bond wasn't just forged in the glow of movie sets or the glitter of fame, it was tested by private struggles, quiet sacrifices, and heartbreak the public never saw. What began as a partnership on screen grew into a brotherhood that defined both of their lives, right up until the very end. Now, after decades of silence, the truth is finally being told. Not by tabloids chasing headlines or authors hungry for scandal, but by the one man who lived every moment of it, Robert Redford. Long before they became Butch and Sundance, they were simply two boys from opposite worlds, destined to collide. One lived by rules and responsibility, the other thrived on risk and rebellion. Two lives that never should have intersected were already racing toward the same fate. Paul Newman's story began far from Hollywood's spotlight, in the quiet, orderly suburbs of Shaker Heights, Ohio. Born on January 26, 1925, to Arthur Newman, co-owner of a thriving sporting goods store, Paul's childhood was safe, stable, and disciplined. But even in that structured world, a spark burned. At just 7 years old, he stole the stage as a mischievous jester in a school play. By 10, he was performing at the Cleveland Playhouse, his natural talent undeniable, his destiny already pulling him far beyond the neat, middle-class life he had been born into. But then the world was plunged into war, and Paul Newman's life took a turn that would mark him forever. In 1943, he enlisted in the U.S. Navy, determined to become a pilot. He entered the Navy's elite V-12 program at Yale, only to have his dream grounded by a cruel twist of fate. A routine physical revealed that his legendary blue eyes concealed a flaw. He was colorblind. His wings were clipped before he ever left the ground. Instead, Newman trained as a radio operator and rear gunner on torpedo bombers. Assigned to the USS Bunker Hill during the deadly Pacific Campaign, he carried the weight of war on his shoulders. Then destiny intervened. On the very day his crew was scheduled to deploy, his pilot was grounded with a severe ear infection, forcing Newman and his team to remain behind. Their squadron went on without them. Days later, catastrophe struck. The Bunker Hill was hit by two kamikaze planes, engulfed in fire and devastation. Many of Newman's fellow airmen were lost in an instant. He survived, not through heroics, but because of a single earache. That narrow escape haunted him. It was a reminder of how fragile life truly is, a brush with fate that carved itself into his soul and shaped the man, the actor, and the legend he would one day become. While Newman was discovering the concepts of duty and fate in the Navy, Robert Redford was absorbing a different array of lessons on the streets of California. Born in Santa Monica on August 18, 1936, his upbringing was a stark contrast to the serene stability of Shaker Heights. His father toiled long hours, initially as a milkman and later as an accountant, and the family relocated to Van, New York, a place Redford would later describe as a cultural mud-sea. He was a restless, freckle-faced youth who felt confined by the monotony of suburban life. To break free, he became a rebel, scaling buildings and pilfering hubcaps purely for the thrill. However, his rebellious nature faced an early challenge. At the age of 11, Redford contracted a mild case of polio. It wasn't severe enough to require an iron lung, but it did leave him bedridden for weeks, a period of enforced stillness for a boy who yearned to be active. This experience, this early struggle, only intensified his craving for action and adventure in the years to come. He thrived in sports and secured a baseball scholarship to the University of Colorado. Yet, his rebellious tendencies trailed him. He began drinking, skipping classes, and ultimately got kicked off the team, forfeiting his scholarship. Adrift and disillusioned, he wandered through Europe, seeking to find himself as a painter before eventually arriving in New York to pursue acting, a career he had once deemed absurd. One man was a war hero who narrowly escaped death and returned to study drama on the GI Bill. The other was a college dropout and a self-proclaimed outlaw who stumbled into the world of acting. They were two sides of the American coin, one shaped by discipline and order, the other by rebellion and restless fire. And in Hollywood, their destinies were about to collide. By 1968, Paul Newman was no longer just a leading man. He was an icon. With the hustler and cool hand look, he had become one of the most bankable and admired actors in the world. Robert Redford, meanwhile, was still climbing. His biggest credit was opposite Jane Fonda in Barefoot in the Park, a charming role, but hardly the kind that made legends. He was a respected working actor, but not yet a star. Then came a script that would change everything, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. When Redford read the part of Sundance, he knew instantly, it was him. The role embodied the outlaw spirit he had carried all his life. But 20th Century Fox didn't see it. They wanted another megastar to pair with Newman, someone with proven box office power. Redford wasn't even on their shortlist. It was director George Roy Hill who saw what the studio could not. He believed Redford was the only man for the role. The fight dragged on for months, with Fox pressuring Hill to cast bigger names. But Hill refused to compromise. He kept pushing for Redford, convinced that this unknown had the spark to stand toe-to-toe with Paul Newman, and together, make history. The studio made every effort to exclude Redford from the movie. Paul Newman was the only person still standing. He had the authority to select his co-star and to get the film produced. In New York, he met Redford at Newman's residence. Newman listened to the studio's worries before making a choice that would alter Redford's career and create a lifelong loyalty. He confronted the studio executives, stating that he preferred to collaborate with an actor rather than a mere celebrity. For a man he hardly knew, he risked his own reputation. Later, Redford would admit that he had no idea how many Hollywood individuals would have done it. The majority would have paid attention to the studio powers or their representatives. Newman, however, was unique. Redford was only cast in the movie because of his backing. Redford never forgot that act of integrity. "I always felt like I owed Paul for that," he remarked. Their connection was cemented at this very moment. It had nothing to do with money or celebrity. It had to do with honoring the craft. The studio didn't see Redford the way Newman did. A mutual commitment to the job that extended beyond Hollywood. At last, the studio agreed, but only under one final stipulation. They insisted on changing the title because Newman was the more well-known star. Originally titled The Sundance Kid and Butch Cassidy, the names were changed to favor Newman's role in order to please the studio. It was a minor expense. A famous collaboration began when the two men were eventually brought together on television. Their friendship developed a distinctive rhythm on the set of Butch Cassidy and then The Sting. They were the ultimate pros when the cameras were rolling. Both individuals had a strong appreciation for the art of acting and had experience in live television and theater. Newman enjoyed a lot of rehearsal and was renowned for his passionate engagement. They would challenge one another to improve every scene while delving deeply into their personalities for hours on end. But a new dynamic emerged the instant the director shouted cut. According to Redford, they were essentially American actors who were irreverent, playful, and constantly trying to outdo each other. They had their own set of rules when they first started dating. Newman had to put up with Redford constantly being 10 to 15 minutes late, and Redford had to laugh at all of Newman's godawful jokes. To make fun of Redford's lack of timeliness between their first and second movies, Newman even handed him a pillow embroidered with the words, "Punctuality is the courtesy of kings." They kept themselves grounded by engaging in this light-hearted battle. They sought a means to remind themselves and each other that they were only two guys in a world that regarded them as idols. According to Redford, in order to maintain equilibrium, you need a way to bring yourself down if you're seen as an icon. That mechanism was a long-running, epic prank battle to them. Newman's love of auto racing was the subject of the most well-known of these practical jokes. Newman fell in love with racing after taking a drive in Redford's Porsche after filming Butch Cassidy. He became proficient in incredible reflexes, but Redford became obsessed with his constant discourse about it. Redford chose to send a greeting on Newman's 50th birthday. He located a completely destroyed Porsche shell in a Connecticut junkyard, had it wrapped in a ribbon as a gift, and brought it to Newman's porch with a message that read, "Happy 50th." Newman didn't mention anything at all. There was stillness for weeks. Then one day Redford returned home to his rental home to see a huge, unfathomably massive crate in the center of his living room. The flooring were dented because it was so heavy. The Porsche was smashed into a solid cube of molten metal inside. Newman had received his retribution. Redford wasn't finished, though. He commissioned a work of art and had the block of metal delivered to a buddy who was a sculptor. "It's a pretty terrible sculpture," he said. Then he had it dropped covertly in the center of Paul Newman's immaculate garden. Neither guy ever mentioned the Porsche, the cube, or the sculpture to the day of Newman's death. Any other words would have destroyed the humor because it was so flawless. It was evidence of a camaraderie that, as Redford put it, required nothing in the way of words. A deeper, more solemn bond between the two men was developing, based on a sort of parallel tragedy that few people were aware of, even as the world witnessed the humor, the practical jokes, and the magic on screen. Paul Newman and Robert Redford both had a personal burden that would covertly define their lives. A son was lost by both men. Lola Van Wagen, a Utah college student, was married to a young Robert Redford in 1958. They were just getting started and leading a peaceful life away from the spotlight of Hollywood. Their first child, a son they called Scott Anthony Redford, was born in September 1959. However, their happiness was very fleeting. On November 17, 1959, just 2.5 months later, their baby boy passed away from SIDS, or sudden infant death syndrome. Redford hardly ever spoke his own anguish in public, but it was a devastating blow. Long before he became the Sundance Kid, he and Lola had to deal with an unfathomable loss. Tragic events befell Paul Newman's family in a tragically similar manner almost 20 years later. Scott was also the name of Newman's son from his first marriage to Jackie Witt. Scott Newman was raised under the looming shadow of his well-known father. He attempted to emulate him by becoming an actor, but he found it difficult to handle the demands of being Paul Newman's son. "Being his son is hell," he once remarked. "His blue eyes are not like mine. His talent is not mine. I am not as fortunate as he is. I have nothing at all. I am that." Scott Newman passed away on November 20, 1978, at the age of 28, after unintentionally consuming too much alcohol and narcotics. Paul Newman would live with a lifelong spiral of remorse as a result of the loss. His most profound regrets were revealed in an infamous memoir. "I continued to believe that he was experiencing a period of poor judgment typical of adolescence. According to Newman, I never thought it would be fatal. He kept asking himself whether there was anything he could have done. Was there any way I could have let him know he could simply be himself and that he didn't have to be like me or do manly things?" He acknowledged the extent of the grief, saying, "I have knelt down numerous times and begged Scott's pardon." This unsaid suffering served as the covert catalyst for a common goal that would ultimately shape the latter part of their lives. Both Redford and Newman grew more and more devoted to a common belief as they aged. "If you are lucky enough to succeed, you should put something back," Redford said. This was more than just a good idea for both men. It served as a compass. They created legacies that would outlive any movie by using their wealth and popularity. They achieved this by battling for their independence. Paul Newman's journey of selflessness began in his own kitchen. He started putting his homemade salad dressing into bottles to give as presents to friends. It gained so much popularity that he and his friend A.E.H. Hotchner made the decision to develop it into a company named Newman's Own. Newman promised to donate all of the revenues to charity right from the start. By making this choice, he was able to finance the issues he was passionate about without any financial interference from Hollywood. Thousands of charity have received hundreds of millions of dollars from Newman's throughout the years. His personal suffering served as the impetus for his most intimate endeavor. He established the Hole-in-the-Wall Gang Camp in 1988 so that children with life-threatening illnesses could get away from their therapies and just be children. Built in honor of a son he was unable to save, it was a place of pleasure and mischief. Hundreds of thousands of children and their families have benefited from the camp's expansion into the Serious Fun Children's Network, a global network of camps. Newman wasn't an actor portraying a hero in this piece. The truth is, he was a hero. Robert Redford was creating a legacy of art, while Newman was creating a legacy of philanthropy. He felt that the Hollywood studio system suppressed creativity and disregarded original voices, and he had grown weary of it. Thus, he established the Sundance Institute in Utah in 1980. His objective was to establish an environment free from studio influence where independent filmmakers could grow their careers and advance their projects. This endeavor led to the creation of the Sundance Film Festival, which has grown to be the world's most significant independent film festival, launching the careers of many filmmakers and authors. Redford established artistic independence for a new generation of storytellers, much like Newman established financial independence with his charities. They were engaged in parallel conflicts, empowering others with their victories. And they helped each other through it all. They supported one another monetarily and attended each other's festivities. It was a low-key collaboration based on a mutual recognition that their real mission went much beyond the cinema screen. Fans begged for a third movie for years. Why did the finest partnership in Hollywood never work together again after The Sting? In actuality, it wasn't because I didn't try. Redford, Newman and director George Roy Hill continuously searched for another story they could work on together for over 13 years. However, the standard had been set too high. They refused to make a third movie just for financial or nostalgic reasons since they knew they had already captured lightning in a bottle twice. They were unable to locate a story that was unique enough to honor Butch Cassidy and the Sting's history. Only once did they come near. The rights to Bill Bryson's book, A Walk in the Woods, which tells the tale of two elderly friends who reunite while hiking the Appalachian Trail, were purchased by Redford in the late 1990s. It seemed best, a quiet, person-pushed tale for two getting-old icons. Redford brought the assignment to Newman, but by then his vintage friend's health became failing. Newman felt he changed into too old and now not physically capable of managing the demands of the position, and he regretfully became it down. He could simplest appear in a single Greater Live Movement movie, Avenue to Perdition, before retiring. The possibility changed into misplaced all the time. Inside the very last months of Newman's life as he battled cancer, Redford went to visit him at his domestic in Connecticut. He knew the deal, and Newman knew the deal. The cease become near, however they didn't communicate about it. There has been no need for tearful goodbyes or grand speeches. Instead, they sat and talked about what became on their minds, the imminent election, politics, and what had to be finished inside the International. Their friendship changed into real and present right as much as the very quit. Paul Newman exceeded away on September 26, 2008 on the age of 83. The world mourned the loss of a legend. Tributes poured in from absolutely everyone. But the assertion that mattered most came from his oldest friend. It turned into brief, simple, and effective. Robert Redford stated, "There's a point where feelings move beyond words. I've misplaced a real friend. My existence and this U.S. A. is higher for his being in it." In the long run, what Robert Redford sooner or later spoke up approximately wasn't a hidden feud or a darkish Hollywood secret. It turned into the quiet 50-year story of a brotherhood cast in an act of loyalty, tested by way of repute, and deepened by a grief that handiest they may apprehend. The arena saw two movie stars, however Redford noticed a brother. And in a world of fleeting celebrity, their real lasting legacy became no longer just inside the iconic movies they made, however in the uncommon and actual friendship they shared.